John chapter 7. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judea because the Jews, now when you see that, it's referring to the religious leaders, the religious authorities. They sought to kill him. It is quite mind-boggling that anybody would even be in opposition with Jesus, would even be irritated by Jesus. If they would even say, I'm really not interested in hearing him speak. I heard he's speaking over there. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to just go over the other place. I'm going to go to the swap meet and go buy me a new piñata or something. I'm just not going to go hear Jesus. I mean, that would have been enough. But there is something much, much deeper going on, as we're going to discover tonight. And they wanted to kill him. We see in John chapter 5 that this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus, sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father has been working until now, I've been working. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but he also said God was his Father, making himself equal with God. So it seems like in their estimation of things, they had sort of an endless supply of reasons to kill him. It wasn't just irritating, not just wanting to ignore him, but truly had in their heart to want to not just have him dead, but be a part of killing him. And in verse 2, just to give us a time frame, this was the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. So that tells us right around the September, October time, which we find ourselves approaching September. And on the equator, Israel is exactly where we're at almost. So it's very much like here. As a matter of fact, you get people from all over the world going to Israel going, this is so unique, it's so different. And we're going, am I in Ramona? It's very much like here. So the tabernacles is sort of a cool thing that it was sort of, God's amazing. I mean, he amazes me. See a little fly buzzing around, it just sort of blows my mind that fly's there. But he set up that once a year, mandatory for every man 20 years and above, had to basically go camping with their family. Bottom line, they were to build a little lean-to with branches and whatever brush they could find, and they were supposed to sleep in it for a week with the whole family. And it was one of the three feasts. You have Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles that were absolutely, it was the death penalty if you didn't take your kids camping. So it's interesting, though, to go to Israel at this time of year. I have been there, and they do it in their front yard, on their roof, or on their balcony of their apartment. So there's no excuse. If you had a little tiny studio apartment, you were supposed to make one in your apartment then, and everybody's supposed to sleep in it. And of course, it's to remind them of the Lord providing for them when they went through the desert. But in John chapter 1, it says that Jesus came, and it's a specific word that says he tabernacled amongst us. Your Bibles will translate in John 1, he dwelt amongst us, but it's actually the word tabernacled. And so this is a prophecy of the fulfillment of Jesus coming in human flesh. And it's also during the harvest time, and there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Well, in John chapter 7, verse 3, now his brothers therefore said to him, so his brothers are getting together, and they're all standing around in a group, And they said to him, "Depart from here and go up to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world, for even his brothers did not believe in him." Now, some of you might say, brothers? How could Jesus have brothers? Well, really, it's a very natural thing. Mary was married to Joseph. Now, the problem comes when people are taught, not by scriptures, but in opposition to the scriptures, that Mary is deified. And if Mary is in some part deity, it is rather strange that she would have natural relations with her husband Joseph. But the Bible teaches us she was a virgin until Jesus was born. And after that, she is going to be the most blessed among women. I don't want to take anything away from what the Bible gives us of her example and her heart and her yieldedness to God. It's an example to all of us. But in no way was she any more human. Was she any more deity than you and me? She was human. After she gave birth to Jesus, she had natural, normal relationships with her husband. And this is what the Bible says. Matter of fact, in Mark chapter 3, the problem they had with Jesus is he was claiming to be God when they knew that he had natural brothers and sisters. And they knew his family. And there was, in their minds, if Jesus was somehow God, then the whole family's God. And it was a bizarre thing. And in this case, they're saying, well, since Jesus is God, Mary's God. No, guys. There's no such thought process. As a matter of fact, in verse 55, it tells us here in Matthew 13, this is not the carpenter's son. They were wrong about that. It was not Joseph's son. But his mother is called Mary, and his brothers, and it actually names them: James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, and his sisters. So he had a rather large family, the older brother of that family. Now you say, well, what does the Catholic Church do with this? They try to manipulate the word brothers into cousins. So Jesus had, guys, you really got to work hard at this. If in context, the bottom line is they're saying we know his family intimately, and we know his parents and how he came in such a natural way, so how could Jesus be supernatural? Of course, they didn't understand the virgin birth. However, I do want to make a note that after the resurrection, his family did become believers. And as a matter of fact, James is the author of the Epistle of James, the half-brother of our Lord according to the flesh. Now, you say, man, his own family didn't believe in him. That would have been tough. That really would have been hard to grow up in a world in which there was no refuge for him, in which they didn't respect him. And as a matter of fact, we discover this in a prophecy of Jesus in Psalm 69, verse 8 and 9. I become a stranger to my brothers, an alien to my mother's children. And then we know a clear quote about Jesus: because zeal for your house has eaten me up. The reproaches of those who reproach me have fallen upon me. So no doubt this verse would have been a great comfort to Jesus to say, yeah, as hard as it is to live with it and the rejection of it on a daily basis in the family for 30 years, no leaving home at 18. He was there. We assume that his father, Joseph, had died, and he was the sole, really, caretaker of his mother and family. It would have been incredibly hurtful to Jesus. But their worldly thought process was, why don't you show yourself to the world? This is natural. If you're the Messiah, we don't believe that. We've lived with you the last 30 years. You call mom like the rest. Either way, if you think it's just us not believing in you, go present yourself to Jerusalem and see what happens. I think you're going to find that it's not just your 4 brothers and your sisters who think that's about you. The whole nation thinks you're nuts. And they said this, again, knowing that they were plotting a plan. The moment Jesus walked up there with his disciples, he would have been identified and put to death. And they knew this. Interesting that Satan and his first temptation was on this very point. Satan told him, took him up to the exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said, all these things I give to you if you fall down and worship me. And I've discovered I got the wrong verse there. That this is where he takes him to the pinnacle of the temple in Matthew chapter 4. Not those verses, another verse, where he says, throw yourself down and watch and see what happens, and the people will give you glory. Also, in the apostles, they thought the same thing. Judas, another apostle of Jesus, not Iscariot, Lord, how is it that you manifest yourself to us and not to the world? So it didn't seem right that he wasn't really displaying kingship, lordship, in a way that would just be sort of a natural progression of somebody taking over in this role. But such a day is coming. Revelation 1:7 said that one day he's coming with the clouds. Every eye will see him, even they who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn because of him. So there is a day that Jesus will show himself openly, but it wasn't before the crucifixion. It would be, as we know, a few thousand years after his resurrection. And Jesus said to his brothers, so he's talking to these 4 guys, sort of picture him, if you would, sort of the brother, annoying brother type thing. My time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. I'm operating in the Father's timetable. There is a divine plan for my life. Boy, the last verse of Psalm 1, verse 6, it just sort of slides in there and says, the way of the righteous the Lord knows. The way of the wicked, depends on the translation, it says it will perish, or one translation says it's unknown, or it's irrelevant. And he's in essence saying to them that until your life is submitted to the will of God, that there isn't this divine timetable working with you. And I know there has been times in my life I just wasn't walking in step with God. And that is the most frustrating time in the world, because you just don't sense that you're where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to do, and you're sort of out of step. And all of a sudden, you become dysfunctional. Those around you become dysfunctional. It's a hard place to be. But Jesus was in that sweet spot in the Father's timing. Ecclesiastes says all things God makes beautiful in his perfect timing. And boy, this is a point driven home here in the Gospel of John. In chapter 2, verse 4, he says, woman, what does your concern have to do with me? Referring to Mary, his mother, about changing the water to wine. He says, my hour has not yet come. John 7:6, Jesus said, my time is not yet come, but your time is already. And then in verse 7-8, you go up to this feast. I am not yet going up to this feast, for my time has not fully come. Chapter 7, verse 30, therefore they sought to take him, but no one laid hand on him because his hour had not yet come. And in chapter 8, verse 20, These words Jesus spoke to the treasury as he taught in the temple, and no one laid hands on him, for his hour had not yet come. And in chapter 12, verse 23, Jesus answered and said, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. In chapter 13, verse 1, now before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he would depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. In chapter 17, verse 1, Jesus spoke these words, lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son also may be glorified in you. So Jesus would not be tempted to hurry up God's plan. Boy, have you ever been in that place? God never works in our timetable, and I'm glad he doesn't, but it's frustrating at times because it seems like God's lagging. But Jesus, I would say, never lagged behind either. He had a sense of walking in the Father's perfect timing. And again, Jesus, the works he did, we're to do. We're going to learn later in John 14, and even greater works. So Jesus is an example that we're to follow. He's not a unique example. He's the exact example that we are to follow. And in John chapter 7, verse 7, moving on, the world can not hate you, but, wow, this is heavy, it hates me. We just got to sort of stop and think about this, because this was true then, and it's true today. Remember earlier in John, Jesus said, I come in my Father's name, nature, and you hate me. But there's one coming in his own nature, and him you will receive, referring to the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist. So we are not of the spirit of this world. And so as they hated Jesus, as you're walking in step with him, they are going to hate you. And he says, because I testified that its works are evil. Jesus was not a feel-good preacher. Jesus was not a people pleaser. Jesus was one who brought the truth, that the truth would set men free. And that meant to call it the way it is. And in this sense, he called sin, sin. In John chapter 3, starting in verse 16, a familiar verse, but we're really getting on down to verse 20. But God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. God did not send his Son in the world to condemn the world. So although he said man's sins are sins, and that he testifies against their works that they're evil, it was not in a spirit of condemnation, but that the world through him might be saved. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he's not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Now, verse 19 and 20 are the key ones here. This is the condemnation. The light has come into the world. Men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. And everyone who practices evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they've been done in God. So if people are unwilling to leave the darkness, unwilling to come into the light, then they're going to hate what we're doing right now. They're going to hate what we stand for. They're going to hate that we're walking a narrow road because they want a broader road, and our very presence, being the light of the world, is condemning them and their actions. And it's nothing you said. It's not the smirk on your face. It's not your t-shirt. It's not your bumper sticker. It's Jesus. They're hating Jesus. They're seeing him in you, but it's not you. It's him. They always have hated him. They always will hate him. In verse 8, you go up to this feast. I am not yet going to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come. And when he had said these things to them, he remained in Galilee. But when his brothers had gone up, then he also went up to the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. Then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, "Where is he?" So he pushed back with his brothers and he said, You're not moving me. I'm not being moved by you. And they just like, forget you. We're going to go up. And of course, if you understand the Jewish culture, they went up in families. They went up in villages. They went up in cities. And when we saw Jesus at the age of 12 in Luke, he had gone up with his entire village of Nazareth. And on his return home, his parents assumed he was somewhere with some family running around, but he had stayed in Jerusalem. They had to go back and get him. And so it would have been a rather awkward thing for Jesus not to go up. He was the oldest brother. He was sort of the head of this clan, if you would, in a natural sense. And this would have been probably an odd year not to have gone up with his 4 brothers, as was mandatory that all Jews 20 years old and above go. And in verse 12, now there was much complaining or murmuring, as the children of Israel often did, among the people concerning him. And some said, he is good. Others said, no, on the contrary, he deceives the people. And I might mention on down, we'll get there next week in verse 20, they said, you have a demon, and you think that demon's trying to kill you. A matter of fact, in John 8:48, 8:40, 8:52, 10:20, they said repeatedly he was demon-possessed. And in Matthew, it tells us that they believed he was Beelzebub, that was the head demon over the Galilee area, and that's why he was able to cast demons out, because he was a demon himself in charge of lesser demons. And they said that in chapter 10:25, 12:24, and 12:27. So Jesus heard on a pretty regular basis, we know you. We've got you figured out. You're a deceiver. You're a demon. You are a demon deceiving us. But probably the most insulting thing said about Jesus, the one that should insult us the most, is that they said he was good. Now you say, well, why would they say that? Why would that? C.S. Lewis pointed out that Jesus is a liar, Jesus is crazy, but Jesus cannot be a good teacher and a good prophet. He did not leave us that option because he plainly said he was God. So if he wasn't God and he knew it, he was a liar and a deceiver. Or he was crazy. And so it really stops to make us rethink what it was like growing up with Jesus in Nazareth. You know, the lost gospels they tell you about, most of them are called infant gospels. It's the first 12 years of Jesus' life. and Jesus, you know, was bumping into people and healing the leprosy, and you know, Mary would have a piece of cloth that was on Jesus and it would fall and somebody would pick it up and raise him from the dead, or heal somebody, raise them. It's really sort of strange. But Jesus is just sort of oozing power as a child. In one of the Gospels, Jesus, the kids were all making sand objects along the river, and they started making fun of Jesus's because he had made a dove in the sand and it wasn't very good. So he picked it up and blew on it, and the dove flew away. But they wouldn't leave him alone, so he said, die. And so they had to have a city council because Jesus kept getting frustrated with the children as a child, and all the children were being killed off in Nazareth. So it's sort of bizarre But the one thing I think we can decipher here from these 30 years of his life, he wasn't bumping around, healing people and curing people and raising the dead and teaching in the synagogues and preaching that was impactful to people. Because when Jesus started saying, "I'm the Messiah," his brothers are like, "What?" The family, the people of Nazareth are going, "What? We've seen you bumping around Nazareth for 30 years and all of a sudden you're God?" Hey, it makes sense. He's crazy, or he's a deceiver. He got some end game. So I can get it. He's a deceiver. I can get that. He's demon-possessed and he's a crazy guy. I can get that. But he has not left the option to say he's a good man or a good teacher or a good prophet. He is either God or he's not. Now, we just sort of got to stop here this evening and ask ourselves the question. His brothers did not believe in him. And more than that, it seems that they were indifferent about him being killed in Jerusalem. So it wasn't a matter of, oh, well, live and let live, whatever Jesus is doing, who cares? They really didn't believe in him. And they really had no problem with him being put to death by the Jews. As a matter of fact, they were pushing him into the plan that he might be killed. What do we learn from this? Number one, if you've ever thought, "I wish I were more like Jesus, then my family would believe," Jesus' example tells us otherwise. We often think that our failures or our humanness or our mistakes are what's keeping our family from really coming to Christ. My family aren't believers, and it's because I'm just basically a stumbling block to them. I'm a big example of run the opposite of Christianity because I'm making such a mess of this. Guys, I can just tell you that often that is what brings people to Christ. Is they're like, "Wow, you're just like me, and you know better than me, but yet you get to be a Christian and fellowship at church and know the Bible and go to heaven. I can do it." It's funny from time to time where people will come in and they'll be here for a while and they're just sitting. They won't sing. And I'll ask them, it's like, why aren't you singing? And they'll say, I can't sing as well as you guys. Everybody in the church sings so well. That's their impression. Like all of you guys should be in a choir somewhere. And it's just like, dude, that's not the case. But this is sort of an amazing thing that you get somebody a little flat and somebody else a little sharp, and when we all sing together, we sound perfectly on tune. It actually is the case. That's why a choir does sound so amazing, because all the notes are filling in quite beautifully. And actually, if all four parts are being sung, there's actually another voice, another tone being heard that's not being sung, but yet the ear hears it. And through history, they said that was the angel singing with us. But the next thing is, maybe you thought, if only I could present the world around me a more perfect example of Jesus, I'm certain they would see, believe, receive him as I have done in my heart. So here it's now not just in the family, but in the world. Now, let's stop and remember here that Jesus had already done miracles in Jerusalem. He'd come down to Galilee, done miracles, fed the multitudes. He's heading back to Jerusalem now, having now quite a few months under his belt of teachings, of miracles, on top of being Jesus. One who was tempted in all ways as we are, but never sinned. And his human life, according to the flesh, didn't cause anybody to believe. So we just need to stop and ponder that a moment. Number 3, it shows us how difficult Jesus' life really was. He was not respected in his home. He was not respected in his town. And the pressure of that is merciless. You know, I know that in our lives we go through a hard time, and it's sort of beat up at work and beat up in the ministry, and you know, people don't mean to do it. It's just, it happens, right? We sort of are bruised and tattered and wounded from just life. But you go home and you sort of expect your family to soothe those sores, huh? I mean, if your family's not doing that, get a dog. You can kick it in the morning, it'll love you in the evening, right? I mean, but the idea is most of us, I think, will find a kind word at home. Some kind of healing and refuge from our spouse, our parents, our kids. Jesus did not have that. You say, well, Bryan, I mean, how do you know that for sure? Well, Isaiah 53. It actually tells us about these first 30 years of Jesus' life in verses 1 through 3. Who has believed our report, or to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root out of the dry ground. He has no form or comeliness. Guys, I'm not trying to be rude here. It's just saying he was ugly. Okay, I'm just telling you. Jesus was on the ugly side in human nature. And when you see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised, rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. We hid him, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Jesus was a man who had been wounded greatly, tempted in all points, and he tells us that's why he's a great and wonderful high priest who can sympathize with all of us and give us aid to help in ways that not everybody can. Misery loves company, and Jesus is good company. And in verse 4, or number 4, the fourth thing we learn from his brothers not believing, that if a person receives Jesus and believes into salvation in Jesus, it's not because of a perfect information or perfect presentation. It's a gift of God, which was granted to us before time began. John 1:12 and 13, but as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, not of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. John 6:44, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. 2 Timothy 1:9, who has saved us, who's called us with a holy calling, not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and grace, which was given us in Christ Jesus before time began. So how do we come to believe in Jesus? How does your family come to believe in Jesus? How do your neighbors come to believe in Jesus? How do those in the workplace believe in Jesus? Only if I were better. Only if I were not stumbling so badly. Only if I were kinder. Only if I were a better example of Jesus. I know they already would have came to Christ. Not true, guys. That's our human knowledge. That's our human view of things. Nothing can hinder the Father from getting someone to Jesus, his Son. His Father will get them to his Son, and Jesus will receive them. He'll reject none. He'll raise them up on the last day. And the fifth thing we learn is Jesus ultimately, we're in a spiritual world, and we will never be able to satisfy or please the unbelieving heart, no matter how kind, loving, perfect we might strive to be. So, if anybody could have pleased the world, and we would have thought Jesus having perfect kindness, perfect love, tempted to be frustrated, tempted to be angry, tempted to have outbursts, but he never did. We honestly, I think we all would have thought, and Jesus' brothers had the inside scoop, and they were his top believers. His sisters ran his fan club. That's what we would have thought, right? I mean, I think the natural progression of things, swaddling clothes, the Magi come, he's perfect, he's 2 years old, his baby brother's born, he's the perfect older brother, all the brothers love and respect him and look up to him, and he takes care of mom, and Jesus is just this amazingly loving, caring, perfect person, and they always believed, like, keep your eye on that guy. If Jesus ever claims to be Messiah, believe it. I've lived with him for 30 years. That's what we would have expected, right? I sort of wonder on a human level if they all sort of hated him going, Mary going, as people can often do, why can't you make your bed like Jesus, Why can't you respect me like your older brother? Jesus never leads to live up on the toilet. I don't know. It would have been a hard act to follow. Maybe just on that note, we could understand why they hated him. But anyway, again, number 6, even if the most perfect example of Jesus and his kindness, patience, observed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, perfect life for 30 years, actually could possibly irritate the unbelieving heart, and they wish for us to go away or even die. So 30 years of living around somebody perfect actually caused them to disdain him. So again, I think the key for us as Christians is to walk in grace. And that we're not perfect as humans. I mean, that's not our goal. In other words, Jesus' example shows us here that we're not trying to live perfect so others go, wow, I've known you for 30 years and you have done everything perfectly. That's never going to be the goal. That's never really going to happen. And even if it did, would it really give that much value to the people around you? Or you just are stumbling around and falling and crying out for mercy, and as you receive mercy, you're giving mercy. As you're receiving forgiveness, you're giving forgiveness. And that the people that like being around you, just like the fact that you're human like them, and you blow it, and you say, forgive me, and we move forward. And the fact is, I really enjoy the fact that you're like me. I enjoy the fact that you stumble around and aren't so perfect, and you know it, and it affects the humility of your heart. Of just going, God, I'm so weak. I wish I were more holy and righteous and pure. Forgive me. And there's just this humble, broken heart that really is a blessing to others. Amen? I think that's the goal that we learn here. And again, it's spiritual battle, guys. Ephesians 6:12, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Jesus was fighting for the souls of his brothers and sisters, and it wasn't a perfect life that was going to reach them. It was a spiritual battle, and it was the power of God unto salvation. Number 7, if man cannot judge Jesus according to the flesh correctly, we must conclude that we cannot think our judgment would be right about anyone else. Jesus' brothers later believed on him, and I wonder if you look back on their judging Jesus with total shame and getting it so wrong. Even to the point that knowing Jesus would be killed if he went up to the feast openly, they were fine with that. I have to imagine that Jesus' brothers looked back on their heart of unbelief, judging Jesus, getting it so wrong, and there'd have to be, wow. Do you remember how we were so adamant trying to push Jesus to go to the feast? We were really working hard. We really wanted to see that happen, knowing they were plotting to kill him. Wow, how deep was my unbelief? How blind I was. And I lived with the guy 30 years, and I know that he is everything he claimed to be. How did I miss that? How did I get judging Jesus wrong? Do you understand that Jesus was the simplest guy to ever judge? Let me judge you, Jesus. You're perfect. End of story. Next. I mean, there really wasn't like, okay, I know you're perfect, but let's talk about this and talk about that. And remember that time? The fact is if we can't get it right about somebody who did live perfectly, how do we think we could ever get it right about anybody else? I mean, in essence, you would say, if you were perfect, I would know it. They didn't know it. I think, Jesus, you messed up. And I'm your brother. I'd know. You're messed up. People shouldn't believe in you. Matter of fact, if you would die, I would be okay with that. You're a deceiver. You're a liar. You're demon-possessed, maybe. But perfect God? The Messiah? No way. I know he's not the Messiah. I'm sure of that. How off they were in their judgment. And if I think we learn from this, that if Jesus, God in human flesh, who never sinned, who we could say God is love, Jesus was love. Love bears long, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Jesus, in his love, sought everybody else's interest before his own interest, put everybody's needs before his own needs, was the servant of all. He was a humble servant. So, I mean, when you go across the board and to realize we can't judge. The bottom line is, even if we think we're getting it right with somebody, and we might be right on a few details, we're not going to get it right. Interesting, in John 5:22, it says this: the Father judges how many people? No one. But has committed how much judgment? All judgment to the Son. Do you guys get this? God, the first person of the Trinity, says, I don't judge. But I'm leaving it up to Jesus and all of you guys to judge. Is that what he says? He's saying, I have created it, that I don't even judge. So do you really think the Father is going to tolerate somebody else besides Jesus judging? He actually says, if anybody else judges besides Jesus, you're taking the glory away from Jesus, keeping Jesus from being honored equal to the Father. This is a heavy thing to really get. And I think we all know this to a degree. I can just tell you that I'm just thinking through my mind of judgment, criticalness, fault-finding, frustration, anger, even condemnation. And in my mind, as the judge, as the jury, as the prosecutor, I'm the prosecutor speaking to the jury, which is also all me, making these amazing points, and the judge, which is also me, is going, And in reality, the prosecutor is messed up. The jury can't even really talk about it for 1 minute because they have no idea. And we are never to be the judge. Hebrews tells us that Jesus is uniquely, singularly qualified, having been 100% man and 100% God, having left the earth now for eternity in resurrected human body. We're not going to know him according to the flesh as we know now, but forever he is going to be our brethren. Forever we will see his scars in his hand and upon his brow. And as Christ raised from the dead, we don't know what we're going to be like, but we're going to be exactly like Jesus. It says in 1 John 3. Not that we'll be God. We'll always be humanoids in heaven as earthly humanoids. Jesus is God who will always be God. But yet he chose to live eternity in human form like you and me, a resurrected human form. No judgment at all. All judgment unto Jesus. And in chapter 7, verse 13, however, no one spoke openly of him for fear of the Jews. In Proverbs 29:25, it says, the fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. In this Proverbs 28:1, I can tell you that I really sense this verse is for somebody tonight as just a word of prophecy. The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as lions. When I was thinking through this and the Lord just gave me this prophecy, he just said, speak this prophetically tonight. This is a word in the Lord for some of you here tonight. We are not to operate in fear. We are not to operate in judgment. You're free. Just love everybody. Because whatever judgment you have is not going to be right. You're not going to get it right. You're not going to even get close. Be free. And don't walk in fear of man.